Hey friends, welcome back. We're working through the different steps we use when we're telling or presenting a Bible story. And specifically, I want us to pause with step 4. Step 4 is a bit more complicated. This is where we're searching for treasures. What are the things that God has for us in the story? And I want to encourage you as the storyteller, as the facilitator, make sure that you are open to what God has in the story. I don't know how many times I've been surprised by new things that God wants to show me in a story, even stories that I have told many times or feel very comfortable with. So I encourage you, keep an open heart. What is it God has for you, not just the people that you're trying to reach or connect with? Now, I want to come at this by using our kind of our key tool here, which is just question asking. To really delve into this story, whichever one you've picked, questions are so formative and so powerful for really kind of getting at what God has for us, particularly in a group context. So to help us better understand the questions that we recommend or the ones we have found helpful, I want to tell you a story. Now, this isn't a Bible story. This is just a story we use when we're training to kind of help hold the questions together. So it's a story and it goes like this. Two groups were fighting over a water source, and the conflict became so escalated that they realized they needed a mediator. And so both groups agreed to go to a wise counselor nearby. Now, when they had gone, the wise counselor agreed to meet with them and began by saying, tell me the central core issue. What is going on and how are you guys experiencing? What are you feeling about this? So the two groups kind of tried to summarize what was the main issue and how they were feeling, what they were feeling. And then the wise counselor said, okay, tell me exactly what happened, what was said, what was done, but go slowly. And so the two groups began to recount, well, this is how it started, and this is what happened, and this is what was said. And then the wise counselor stopped them. They hadn't gone very far. And he said, okay, what choices were made at this point? And so the two groups told him what choices had been made. And he asked, well, what other choices could have been made? And so they began to think and said, well, we could have done this or we could have done that. He said, what was the choice that was made? And he reiterated, he made them go back and tell again, well, this is what was decided. He asked a follow-up question, what were the results of your choices? So they began to think and then talked about, well, these were the results. He then asked an interesting question, what were the long-term implications or consequences of your choices? They began to think and realized there had been some, and so they talked about those as well. Finally, the wise counselor said, what can you learn about yourself or about the other group through the choices that they have made thus far in the story? So they hadn't given that much thought, so they thought and finally began to share it with one another. Finally, the wise counselor said, okay, go ahead, carry on with the story. Tell me some more. And so they started telling him more of the story. They hadn't gone very far, and he stopped them and said, okay, what choices were made at this point? And he went through that same series of questions. Let's repeat them. What choices were made? What other choices could have been made? What were the results of those choices? What were the long-term implications or consequences? And what can you learn about the characters from the choices that they made? Well, it wasn't long before the wise counselor had a pretty good understanding of the conflict, and he was able to give them a workable solution, one that both parties agreed to. And that's the end of the wise counselor story. That's a simple story, but it's us trying to help all of us get our minds around what are some of these key questions. And we have found the wise counselor questions to be very helpful for kind of opening up stories, even very familiar stories. So we recommend, after you've shared the story, gone through it 3 times, you've told the story, you've asked for a volunteer, you've led through the story, then share just the first part of the story, just like the wise counselor, and begin with some of those questions. What was said? What was done? What choices were made? What other choices could have been made? What were the results? The long-term implications? And what can we learn about characters from the choices they did make thus far? Now, again, all of those questions may not be relevant for the first part of the story. So you may be like, well, there aren't any results yet. That's fine. Great. Just skip that one. Leave it for later on. But if you get in the habit of trying to say, hey, do any of these connect thus far? Maybe in the first just couple of verses or the first segment of the story. And then you go on to the next segment, tell a little bit more of the story, and then use those same wise counselor questions. And again, they may not all fit for that second section. That's okay. Find the ones that really connect. And then slowly keep working through the entire story. But those wise counselor questions will open up more than you expect. And you'll be excited to see what God has as you seek to try and say, what are the treasures right here in this story?